The Procession of the Forgotten True Story. In 1991 in Suchitlan, a tiny village nestled beneath the shadow of Colima volcano in Mexico, where there were no streetlights, no telephone signals, and on the night of Dia de Muertos, no one dared to leave their homes after midnight, I made the worst mistake of my life. My name is Tomas. I was 7 years old, and I broke the only rule my grandmother ever gave me. She told me never to look out the window after midnight on November 2nd. She told me that if I heard footsteps, voices, or someone calling my name, I should cover my ears and pray until sunrise. She told me that some doors once opened can never be closed again. I did not listen. I looked. I saw them. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, walking through the mist in the dead of night. And in my childish innocence, I did the one thing that sealed my fate forever. I waved at them. That was 33 years ago. But every year on the night of November 2nd, they come back. They knock on my door, they call my name, and the list of those searching for me grows longer with each passing year. This is the story of that night. And if you are listening to this on Dia de Muertos, I need you to do something for me. Check your windows. Make sure they are locked. Because what I'm about to tell you is not a legend. It is not folklore passed down through generations to scare children into obedience. This happened to me, and it is still happening. I grew up in Suchitlan because my parents worked in Guadalajara 4 hours away by car. They sent me to live with my grandparents when I was 5, believing that a quiet village would be better for a child than the chaos of the city. They visited when they could, which was not often. Phone calls were rare because the village had only one telephone located in the corner store that closed at sunset. I was alone in ways that most children never experience. Not unloved, but isolated. The other children in the village were either much older or much younger than me. I spent most of my days wandering the dusty streets, playing with sticks and stones, inventing games that required no other players. I talked to myself constantly, creating imaginary friends who would listen to my stories and laugh at my jokes. My grandmother, Abuela Remedios, was 65 years old that year, a widow who had worn black every day for as long as anyone could remember. My grandfather, Ignacio, had died in 1956, 35 years before that fateful night, and she had never remarried, never even considered it. She was strict in the way that old Mexican women are strict, with rules that seemed arbitrary until you understood the weight of tradition behind them. Do not whistle after dark. Do not sweep the floor at night. Do not look at your reflection in water by moonlight. Do not speak ill of the dead, especially in November. She loved me fiercely in her own quiet way. She cooked my favorite meals without being asked. She mended my clothes with careful stitches. She checked on me 3 times every night, opening my bedroom door just enough to see the rise and fall of my chest before closing it again. But she rarely smiled, and she never spoke about my grandfather. His name was Ignacio. I knew this only because of the photograph on the altar in the living room, a black and white image that had yellowed with age. In the picture, he wore a wide-brimmed straw hat, the kind that farmers in Colima had worn for generations. His face was stern, his eyes dark, his mouth set in a line that could have been either determination or displeasure. My grandmother kept his photograph polished, the glass always clean, the frame always dusted. But when I asked about him, she would change the subject. Once when I was 6, I asked her how he died. She dropped the plate she was holding. It shattered on the tile floor, and she stood there staring at the pieces for a long time before she finally spoke. "He fell," she said, "by the river, under the mountain." I asked if it was an accident. She did not answer. She simply bent down, collected the broken pieces of the plate, and threw them away. We never spoke of it again. Our house was old, built in the colonial style with thick adobe walls and a red tile roof that leaked when it rained. The floors were uneven, worn smooth by generations of footsteps. The doors creaked, the windows rattled in their frames, and at night the whole structure seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with the changing temperature. I slept in a small room at the corner of the house with a window that looked out onto the main road, the only road that ran through the village. The window was made of wood warped by humidity and age. The glass was thick and cloudy, distorting everything on the other side into vague shapes and shadows. The latch was iron-rusted but still functional, and my grandmother checked it every night before I went to sleep. She would tug on it twice, mutter something under her breath that might have been a prayer, and then close the curtains made of heavy fabric that blocked out all light. I never understood why she was so careful about that window until the night of November 2nd, 1991. Dia de Muertos arrived like it did every year, transforming the village into something magical and strange. By October 31st, the streets were covered with orange marigold petals, creating paths that wound between houses and led to the cemetery on the hill. The smell of cempasúchil was everywhere, so thick and sweet that it coated the inside of my nose and stayed there for days. Mixed with it was the sharp, spicy scent of copal, the resin incense that burned in every home, its smoke curling up toward the sky like prayers made visible. The women of the village spent days preparing food for the dead. Pan de muerto, the sweetbread shaped like bones. Mole, the rich sauce made with chocolate and chilies that took hours to prepare. Tamales wrapped in corn husks, still steaming when placed on the altars. And everywhere sugar skulls with names written on their foreheads, grinning up at the living from their places among the offerings. I loved Dia de Muertos. As a child, I saw only the beauty of it, the colors and the food and the sense that something extraordinary was happening. I did not understand the weight of grief that hung over everything. The tears that fell when the old women visited the graves of their children, the silence that descended after midnight when the celebrations ended and something else began. On the morning of November 1st, my grandmother started building the ofrenda for my grandfather. She cleared the table in the living room and covered it with an embroidered cloth that she kept folded in a cedar chest for the rest of the year. On top of the cloth, she placed his photograph surrounded by candles, flowers, and the food he had loved in life. Tamales, tequila, hand-rolled cigarettes that she made herself even though she had never smoked. And in the center next to the photograph, she placed his hat, the straw hat from the picture, the one he had worn every day of his adult life. I watched her arrange everything with careful precision, her hands trembling slightly as she positioned each item. When she was finished, she stepped back and stared at the altar for a long time without speaking. "Abuela," I said, "will grandfather come tonight?" She did not look at me. She just kept staring at the photograph, at the face of the man she had married when she was 18 years old. "I do not know," she said finally. "I have not seen him in a very long time." This confused me. I thought the whole point of Dia de Muertos was that the dead returned to visit their families. I thought that was why we made the altars, laid out the food, scattered the flower petals to guide them home. If grandfather was dead, why would he not come back to see us? I asked her this, and she finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were red, and I realized she had been crying without making any sound. "Mijo," she said, "not all the dead come home the same way. Some of them walk in the light, some of them walk in the shadows, and some of them," she paused, taking a breath that seemed to cause her physical pain. "Some of them cannot find their way back at all." I did not understand what she meant, but the look on her face frightened me, so I did not ask any more questions. That evening, as the sun began to set and the village grew quiet, my grandmother sat me down at the kitchen table. She had made sopa de fideo, my favorite soup, with thin noodles swimming in tomato broth. I ate hungrily while she watched, barely touching her own food. When I finished, she reached across the table and took both of my hands in hers. Her grip was tight, almost painful, and when she spoke, her voice was different than I had ever heard it. Lower, more urgent, afraid. "Tomas," she said, "tomorrow night is the night of the adults. The night when all the grown souls come back from the other side. They will walk through the village. They will visit their families. But you must promise me something." I nodded, too scared to speak. After midnight, she continued, no matter what you hear, no matter what you see through the window, you must not look outside. You must not open the door. And if you hear someone calling your name, even if it sounds like me, even if it sounds like your mother or father, you must not answer. Do you understand? But why, I asked? Because she said, and her grip on my hands tightened even more, not everyone who walks on that night wants to go back. Some of them are looking for someone to take with them. And if they see you, if they know that you can see them, they will think you want to go with them. And they will never let you go. She made me promise. I promised. And I meant it truly, I did. But I was 7 years old, and curiosity is a force that no promise can contain. That night, the night of November 1st, I lay in bed and listened to the sounds of the village settling into silence. The last of the firecrackers faded away. The music stopped. The laughter and conversation that had filled the streets all day gradually disappeared until there was nothing left but the wind and the distant barking of dogs. I could not sleep. The air in my room felt heavy thick with the scent of marigolds and incense that seeped through every crack and crevice. I kept thinking about what my grandmother had said about the souls that walked in shadows, about the ones who could not find their way home. Around 11 o'clock, I heard something, a soft tap at my window, just once. Tap. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The curtains were drawn, blocking any view of the outside, but I could see the faint glow of candlelight from the living room seeping under my door. I told myself it was nothing. A branch. A bird. The wind. But there were no trees near my window. And I had never heard a bird tap on glass like that before. I lay back down and pulled the covers up to my chin. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the prayers my grandmother had taught me, but the words kept slipping away, replaced by the image of something standing outside my window waiting. The tap did not come again. Eventually exhaustion won, and I fell into a restless sleep filled with dreams of walking figures and the sound of metal dragging on stone. When I woke the next morning, November 2nd, I ran to the living room to check the ofrenda. My grandmother was already there, standing in front of the altar with her hands clasped in front of her. The plate of tamales was half empty. The glass of tequila was drained. The cigarette she had rolled and placed on a small dish had burned down to ash. I shouted with excitement. He came, grandfather came. But my grandmother did not share my joy. Her face was pale, and when she turned to look at me, her eyes were wide with something that looked like fear. It was not just him, she whispered. I heard others, many others. And there was a woman's voice, a voice I did not recognize. She did not explain what she meant. She just turned back to the altar and began to pray, her lips moving rapidly, her fingers working the beads of her rosary. I watched her for a moment, confused and unsettled, before retreating to the kitchen to find breakfast. The rest of that day passed in a haze of preparation and growing dread. My grandmother added more candles to the altar, 3 times as many as the night before. She scattered extra flower petals along the path from the door to the ofrenda. She filled a bottle with holy water and sprinkled it around my bed, muttering prayers in a voice so low I could barely hear her. In the afternoon, one of the neighbor women came to visit. They sat on the porch and spoke in hushed tones, glancing at me occasionally as if to make sure I was not listening. But I was. I crouched behind the door, pressing my ear to the crack, catching fragments of their conversation. The old woman asked my grandmother if she had placed the ofrenda for Ignacio. My grandmother said yes. The woman asked if she had seen him last year. My grandmother was silent for a long time. Then she said, I have not seen him since he died. I do not look. I am afraid of what I might see. The other woman made a sound, something between a sigh and a moan. It has been 35 years, Remedios. Perhaps he is at peace now. My grandmother laughed, but there was no humor in it. Men like Ignacio do not find peace, she said. Not after what he did, not after how he died. They stopped talking then, as if they sensed someone listening. I heard footsteps approaching the door and scrambled away, retreating to my room before they could catch me. But the words stayed with me. Men like Ignacio. What he did, how he died. What had my grandfather done? What did my grandmother know that she had never told me? I did not have time to find answers. The sun was already setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that matched the marigold petals covering the streets. Soon it would be dark. Soon it would be midnight. And I had already decided that no matter what my grandmother said, no matter what I had promised, I was going to look. At dinner, my grandmother could barely eat. Her hands shook as she lifted her spoon. Her eyes kept darting toward the window, then away, as if she expected something to appear there at any moment. Before I went to bed, she hugged me tighter than she ever had before. She held on so long that I began to squirm, uncomfortable with the desperation in her grip. "If you hear anything tonight," she whispered into my hair, "you pray. You pray until the sun comes up. And you do not look, no matter what. You do not look." She pulled back and looked at my face, searching for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her, because she nodded once and released me. I went to my room. I lay down on my bed. I waited. Outside, the village grew quiet. The candles on the altar in the living room cast flickering shadows that danced under my door. The smell of copal grew stronger, mixing with something else, something I could not identify. Something that smelled like wet earth and rotting flowers. At 11:30, I heard my grandmother's voice, muffled by the walls between us. She was speaking to someone, her tone pleading. "Forgive me," she said. "I know you hate me, but please do not touch the boy. He is innocent. He knows nothing." I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear more, but there was only silence, followed by the soft sound of weeping. At 11:45, the dogs throughout the village began to howl. Not bark. Howl. A mournful, eerie sound that rose and fell like waves crashing against a distant shore. I told myself it was just the weather, just the animals sensing the change in the atmosphere, but something deep inside me knew that was not true. At midnight, the church bells began to toll. 12 times they rang, each strike echoing across the valley, bouncing off the mountains, fading into a silence that felt deeper than any silence I had ever known. And then it began. The silence after the 12th bell was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was not merely the absence of sound. It was a presence, a weight that pressed down on my chest and made each breath feel like a conscious effort. The howling had stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving behind a stillness so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3. The shadows from the candles in the living room continued their restless dance beneath my door, but everything else had frozen. No wind, no insects, no dogs. Even the old house, which usually creaked and groaned throughout the night, had fallen silent. Then I smelled it. The scent of marigolds grew suddenly stronger, so intense that it felt like someone had crushed 1,000 flowers and pressed them against my face. Mixed with it came the sharp bite of copal smoke, thicker than before, as if every altar in the village had been lit simultaneously. And beneath those familiar smells, something else crept in, something wet and dark and wrong. The smell of earth freshly turned, the smell of things long buried. At 12:15, I heard the first footsteps. They came from far away, from the direction of the cemetery on the hill. Not one person walking, but many, dozens, hundreds. The sound of bare feet slapping against cobblestones, a rhythmic shuffling that grew louder with each passing moment. I sat up in bed, my blanket clutched to my chest, my eyes fixed on the curtained window. "Do not look," I told myself. "You promised. Do not look." But the footsteps kept coming closer and closer until they sounded like they were right outside my window. And with them came voices. At first they were just murmurs, indistinct whispers that blended together into a low hum. But as the procession drew nearer, individual words began to separate from the noise. Spanish, but spoken strangely with an accent I did not recognize. Old words, formal words, the kind of language my grandmother used when she prayed. "Home," someone said. Finally home. Wait for me, another voice called, I'm coming. And then laughter. Soft, gentle laughter, like old friends reuniting after a long absence. I told myself there was nothing to fear. These were the good spirits, the ones my grandmother had told me about. The souls who returned to visit their families, to eat the food left on the altars, to feel the warmth of candles lit in their memory. They meant no harm. They were just passing through. But then I heard the other sound. It started as a distant scraping metal dragging against stone, rhythmic, relentless, growing louder with each passing second, and mixed with the scraping came something else, a sound that made every hair on my body stand straight up. Moaning. Not the moaning of grief or sadness. This was different. This was the sound of pain so profound that it had transcended words, the sound of suffering that had lasted so long it had become the only thing left. Voices crying out in the darkness, begging for something that would never come. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound slipped through my fingers. It wormed its way into my skull and nested there, echoing against the inside of my bones. Please, a woman's voice sobbed, please let me rest. And another voice, deeper, rougher, there is no rest. There is only this, forever this. I could not stand it anymore. The curiosity that had been building inside me all day, all year, all my short life, finally broke through the walls of my fear. I had to know. I had to see. Even if it killed me, I had to understand what was walking past my window in the dead of night. I pushed back my blanket and swung my leg over the side of the bed. The floor was cold, so cold that it burned the soles of my feet. I had not noticed how much the temperature had dropped. My breath came out in small white clouds, visible even in the darkness. I crossed the room in 3 steps. My hand reached for the curtain. My fingers touched the rough fabric, and then I stopped, because someone was standing on the other side of the glass. I could see the shadow through the curtain, a dark shape blocking the faint moonlight. It was not moving. It was just standing there, perfectly still, facing my window. Facing me. I held my breath. The shadow held its position. Seconds passed, maybe minutes. I could not tell anymore. Time had become something fluid and unreliable, stretching and contracting like the shadows on my wall. Then the shape moved. It raised one hand slowly, deliberately, and pressed it flat against the glass. I could hear the soft thump of contact, could see the impression of fingers splayed against the window. 5 fingers. A human hand. But wrong somehow. The proportions were off, the fingers too long, the palm too wide. I should have run. I should have screamed for my grandmother. I should have done anything except what I did. I pulled back the curtain. The face that stared back at me was not human. Not anymore. It had been human once, perhaps. The basic structure was there, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth. But the skin had gone gray and waxy, stretched tight over bones that seemed too sharp, too prominent. The eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them. No light, no recognition. Just empty sockets filled with something that looked like curdled milk. The mouth opened. No sound came out, but I could see the lips moving, forming words I could not hear through the glass. "Let me in," the lips said. "Let me in, child." I stumbled backward, my foot catching on the edge of my blanket, sending me crashing to the floor. Pain shot through my tailbone, but I barely noticed. I was too busy scrambling away from the window, pressing my back against the far wall, making myself as small as possible. The face remained at the window, watching, waiting. Then slowly it smiled. The smile was the worst part. It was not a smile of joy or greeting, it was a smile of recognition, a smile that said, "I see you, I know you are there, and now you can never hide from me again." The face withdrew from the glass. The shadow moved away from my window, and I heard footsteps, heavy and shuffling, continuing down the road with the rest of the procession. I sat on the floor, shaking so hard that my teeth chattered. I wanted to cry, but the tears would not come. I wanted to scream, but my throat had closed up. All I could do was sit there and listen as the procession continued past my house, as hundreds of feet walked by, as voices laughed and cried and moaned in the darkness. I should have stayed on that floor. I should have waited until morning, until the sun rose and burned away whatever had walked through my village that night. That would have been the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But I was 7 years old, and the face at my window, as terrifying as it was, had awakened something inside me that fear alone could not suppress. I needed to understand. I needed to see the whole picture, not just the one horrible piece that had pressed itself against my glass. So I stood up. I walked back to the window. And this time I did not just pull back the curtain. I opened it. The cold hit me like a physical force, stealing the breath from my lungs and turning my skin to ice. But I barely noticed, because what I saw beyond my window drove every other thought from my mind. The street was filled with mist. It hung low to the ground, barely reaching my windowsill, glowing with a faint luminescence that seemed to come from within. And walking through that mist, stretching as far as I could see in both directions, was a river of people. They moved slowly, deliberately, their feet barely visible beneath the swirling fog. Each one carried a small candle, a tiny flame that flickered but never went out despite the cold wind that had begun to blow. The light from those candles cast strange shadows on the walls of the houses, shadows that danced and twisted in ways that did not match the movements of the people casting them. The first group was beautiful. Men in white shirts and black trousers, their hair slicked back their faces, peaceful and content. Women in embroidered dresses, flowers woven into their braided hair, silver jewelry glinting at their throats and wrists. Children holding hands, laughing silently, pointing at houses they recognized, waving at windows where no one waved back. They looked alive, more alive than living people somehow. Their skin glowed with health, their eyes sparkled with joy. Their movements were fluid and graceful. I could smell perfume and fresh bread and something like summer rain. One of them looked up at me. He was an old man, his face lined with wrinkles, but his eyes bright and clear. He saw me standing at my open window, a 7-year-old boy with wild hair and terrified eyes, and he smiled. Not the horrible smile of the thing that had pressed its face against my glass. This was a kind smile, a grandfatherly smile. He raised his hand and waved. And God help me, I waved back. It seemed like the natural thing to do. He was being friendly. He was being kind. What harm could there be in returning a simple wave? The old man nodded, satisfied, and continued walking. But something had changed. Other people in the procession were looking up now. One by one, their heads turned toward my window, their eyes finding mine in the darkness. They did not seem angry or threatening, just curious. Just interested in the little boy who could see them, who had acknowledged their existence. The procession slowed, more faces turned, more eyes found mine, more hands raised in greeting. And I, still not understanding what I had done, still not comprehending the magnitude of my mistake, waved at them all. The second group was different. They walked in the middle of the procession, their clothes simpler, older, more worn. Farmers and laborers, servants and workers, their faces were not peaceful. They were sad, resigned, empty of the joy that had filled the first group, and they were fading. I could see through some of them, their bodies translucent like colored glass. The candles in their hands burned lower, their flames weak and sputtering. They did not laugh or smile or point at the houses. They just walked, their eyes fixed straight ahead, as if afraid to look at anything that might remind them of what they had lost. One woman stopped in front of a house across the street from mine. She was barely visible, more suggestion than substance, her outline wavering like heat rising from summer pavement. She reached out toward the door, her hand passing through the wood without resistance. She stood there for a long moment, her transparent fingers pressed against the place where the door should have been. Then she turned away, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. She was crying. The tears that ran down her cheeks were not water. They were light drops of pale luminescence that fell from her eyes and disappeared before they reached the ground. She was crying for something she could no longer touch, for people who no longer remembered her name. She looked up and saw me watching. Our eyes met, and in that moment I understood something that I was far too young to understand. I understood what it meant to be forgotten. To have lived an entire life, loved and lost and struggled and survived, only to fade away because no one was left to light a candle in your memory. The woman did not wave. She just looked at me with those luminous, weeping eyes, and then she continued walking, fading a little more with each step until she was nothing but a wisp of fog that dissolved into the night. I should have closed my window then. I should have turned away and buried my face in my pillow and prayed for morning. But I could not move. I could not look away. Because behind the fading one, separated by a gap of empty road, came the third group. And the third group was horror given form. They did not carry candles. They walked in darkness, their shapes blacker than the night around them. They did not wear nice clothes or simple clothes. They wore rags, scraps of fabric that barely covered their bodies, cloth so stained and torn that it was impossible to tell what color it had once been. And they were chained, iron links wrapped around their wrists and ankles, connecting them to each other in a long, shuffling line. The links were old and rusted, stained with something dark that might have been blood or might have been something worse. Every step they took was accompanied by the grinding, clanking sound I had heard earlier, the sound that had first warned me that something terrible was coming. Their faces were wrong. Some had no eyes, just empty sockets that wept black tears. Some had wounds that never healed, gashes and cuts and holes that showed bone and muscle beneath. Some had no faces at all, just smooth expanses of gray skin where features should have been. And they moaned. The sound rose from them like steam from a boiling pot, a constant, keening wail of suffering that seemed to have no beginning and no end. They were in pain. They had been in pain for a very long time, and they would be in pain forever. I wanted to close my window. I wanted to look away, but my body had stopped obeying me. I could only stand there frozen as the chained ones shuffled past. Then one of them looked up. She was a woman, or had been once. Her hair was black and matted, hanging in clumps around a face that might have been beautiful before death and time had done their work. Her skin was the gray of old ash. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, but her eyes were the worst. They were white, completely white, without pupil or iris, like boiled eggs floating in dark water, and they were fixed on me. She stopped walking. The iron connecting her to the person in front of her pulled taut, but she did not seem to notice. She just stood there in the middle of the road, staring up at my window with those terrible empty eyes. Then she smiled. It was the same smile I had seen on the face pressed against my glass, the smile of recognition, the smile that said, "I see you." And she began to move toward me. She should not have been able to. The bonds should have held her, should have kept her in line with the others. But she moved anyway, pushing against the iron links, dragging them behind her as she left the procession and walked toward my house. The others in her group did not stop her. They did not even seem to notice. They just kept walking, their heads down, their moans rising into the night. But she had broken free of the line, and she was coming for me. I tried to close the window. My hands would not obey. I tried to scream. My voice would not come. I could only watch as she came closer, step by dragging step, her bindings scraping against the cobblestones, her colorless eyes never leaving my face. She was close enough now that I could see details I wished I had never seen. The way her jaw hung slightly loose as if it had been broken and never healed. The way her fingers ended in nails that had grown long and curved and black like the claws of some animal. The way her dress, what was left of it, was stained with something dark around the belly, as if she had been stabbed there many times. She reached the wall beneath my window. She stopped, and then she spoke. Her voice was like dead leaves scraping against stone, dry, brittle, broken. "Child," she said, "you waved at me. You see me. You want me to come to you?" I shook my head. No words came out, but I shook my head so hard that my neck hurt. "Yes," she said. "You called to me, you invited me, and now I will never leave you." She raised her hands toward my window. Those horrible curved nails reached up, stretching toward the glass toward me. I was going to die. I knew it with absolute certainty. This thing was going to climb through my window and take me away, drag me down into whatever hell she had crawled out of. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. The nails touched the windowsill. And then hands grabbed me from behind and pulled me backward into the darkness of my room. I hit the floor hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. Above me I could see my grandmother's face, pale and terrified, her lips moving in rapid prayer. She lunged past me, reaching for the window, grabbing the wooden frame with both hands. The woman outside screamed. It was not a human sound. It was the sound of rage and frustration and hunger denied. She clawed at the window as my grandmother tried to close it, her nails leaving deep gouges in the wood. "Let me in!" she shrieked. "He invited me! He is mine!" My grandmother pulled harder. Her old arms strained, the muscles standing out like cords beneath her papery skin. She was muttering prayers, words tumbling over each other in her desperation, calling on every saint she could name. The window began to close, but just before it shut completely, a hand slipped through the gap. A gray hand with black nails reaching into my room, grasping at the air, searching for me. My grandmother did not hesitate. She slammed the window down on that hand with all her strength. I heard bones crack. I heard the woman outside howl in pain, but the hand did not withdraw. It kept reaching, kept grasping, even as my grandmother pressed down harder and harder. In the name of Christ, my grandmother shouted, "Be gone from this house." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her rosary. She pressed the wooden cross against the gray fingers, and where it touched, smoke rose from the skin. The hand jerked back. My grandmother slammed the window shut and threw the latch. She grabbed the curtains and pulled them closed. Then she turned to me, grabbed me by the shoulders, and dragged me away from the window, away from the door, into the corner of the room farthest from any exit. Outside I could hear the woman screaming. The sound was muffled by the walls, but I could still make out the words, "He is mine. He waved at me. He invited me. I will come back. Every year I will come back. He belongs to me now." And then slowly the screaming faded. The footsteps resumed. The iron began to scrape again. The procession was moving on. But we both knew she would keep her promise. She would come back, and she would never stop coming back until she got what she wanted. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking so badly that I could not hold them still. And on my right wrist, where nothing had touched me, where no one had grabbed me, there were red marks, 5 of them, shaped like fingers. My grandmother held me in the corner of that room until my shaking subsided. Her arms wrapped around me like a shield against the darkness pressing in from all sides. The screaming had stopped, but the sounds of the procession continued, outside footsteps and rattling iron and moaning voices that seemed to go on forever. I buried my face in her chest, breathing in the familiar scent of copal and cooking oil that always clung to her clothes, trying to convince myself that I was safe. But I knew I was not safe. I knew it the moment I saw those red marks on my wrist, the fingerprints of something that had never touched me, the brand of a claim I did not understand. When the sounds finally began to fade, when the last of the iron links had scraped past our house and disappeared into the distance, my grandmother loosened her grip. She held me at arm's length, her eyes searching my face with an intensity that frightened me almost as much as the woman outside had. "Let me see your hands," she said. I held them out, palms up, then palms down. The marks on my right wrist stood out clearly in the candlelight, 5 red welts that pulsed with a dull heat. My grandmother made a sound low in her throat. It was not a word. It was the sound of someone watching their worst fears come true. She grabbed my wrist and brought it close to her face, examining the marks with the kind of attention she usually reserved for checking bread in the oven or testing the ripeness of fruit. Her fingers trembled as they traced the outline of each welt. "They are not bleeding," she said more to herself than to me. "The skin is not broken. Perhaps that means something. Perhaps there is still time. Time for what I asked." She did not answer. Instead, she stood up and crossed to the window, pressing her ear against the curtain, listening. Satisfied that nothing was waiting on the other side, she turned back to me. "Tell me everything," she said. "From the beginning. What did you see? What did you do?" I told her. I told her about the tap at my window the night before, about the silence that fell after midnight, about the smell that crept into my room. I told her about the face pressed against the glass, about the mist and the candles, about the 3 groups walking through the village. I told her about the old man who waved, about the fading woman who cried tears of light, about the chained ones who moaned in the darkness. And I told her about the woman who had broken from the line, the woman with empty white eyes and black nails, the woman who had tried to climb through my window. When I finished, my grandmother was crying. Silent tears rolled down her weathered cheeks, disappearing into the lines and wrinkles that mapped her face. She did not wipe them away. She just let them fall. "You waved at them," she said. Her voice was flat empty of everything except exhaustion. "You waved at them and they saw you." I nodded, too ashamed to speak. "Do you understand what you have done?" I shook my head. She sat down heavily on the edge of my bed, her shoulders slumping forward as if the weight of the world had suddenly been placed upon them. "There are rules, Tomas. Rules that have existed since before the Spanish came, since before the Aztecs built their temples, since before men first learned to bury their dead. The living and the dead are not meant to see each other. We can feel their presence, we can sense them passing through, but we are not meant to look upon them, and they are not meant to know that we can see them. Why not, I asked. Because seeing creates a connection, and connections are doors. Once opened, they can never be fully closed." She paused, gathering her thoughts or perhaps her courage. "The woman you saw," she continued, "the one who came to your window. She is called La Llorona by some, the weeping woman. But that is not her true name. Her true name has been forgotten, erased by time and the weight of her sins. She lived in this village more than 100 years ago. She had a husband. She had 2 children, a boy and a girl. And she was loved by another man who was not her husband." My grandmother's voice grew quieter, forcing me to lean in to hear. She wanted to be free. Free of her husband, free of her responsibilities, free to run away with the man she loved. But he did not want children. He told her he would only take her if she came alone. So one night when the moon was dark and the village was sleeping, she took her children to the river. I felt my stomach turn. I did not want to hear the rest, but I could not stop listening. She drowned them, my grandmother said. She held them under the water until they stopped struggling. Then she went to find her lover to tell him she was free. But when he heard what she had done, he fled. He wanted nothing to do with a woman who could murder her own children. She paused again, and when she spoke next, her voice was barely a whisper. She went mad with grief. She ran along the riverbank every night crying and calling for her children. "Mis hijos," she would scream. "My children. Where are my children?" The villagers could hear her for miles. Some say she wailed for 40 days and 40 nights without rest. And on the 41st night she walked into the river herself and did not come back up. What happened to her, I asked, though I already knew the answer. She was buried in unconsecrated ground outside the cemetery with no marker and no prayers. No one lit a candle for her. No one placed flowers on her grave. She was forgotten by everyone except those who remembered her crimes. And when Dia de Muertos came, she did not walk with the blessed souls or even with the forgotten ones. She walked with the damned, the chained ones, the ones who can never find peace. My grandmother looked at me, her eyes red and swollen, but she has not forgotten what she wants. She still searches for children. She still believes that if she can find them, if she can take them with her, she will be forgiven. She will be allowed to rest. So every year on this night, she looks for children who can see her, children who acknowledge her, children who invite her in. She reached out and touched the marks on my wrist. And tonight she found one. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to wake up and discover that this had all been a nightmare, that I was still lying in my bed in Guadalajara with my parents in the next room. But the marks on my wrist pulsed with heat, reminding me that this was real, that there was no waking up. "What do?" I asked. "How do I make her go away?" My grandmother shook her head slowly. "I do not know if you can. Those who have caught her attention before, the children who waved at her or spoke to her or opened their doors when she knocked." She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. None of them lived past their 18th birthday. The words hit me like a blow to the chest. I was 7 years old. That gave me 11 years. 11 years of waiting for her to come back. 11 years of hiding every November 2nd, praying that this would be the year she forgot about me. But she would never forget. I had seen it in her eyes. I had heard it in her voice. I belonged to her now, and she would collect what was hers eventually. My grandmother must have seen the despair in my face, because she pulled me close again, pressing my head against her shoulder. "Listen to me," she said. "There may be a way. There must be a way. The sun will rise soon, and she will have to return to wherever the damned go when the night ends, but she will leave something behind. A mark, a token, something to maintain the connection between you. We must find it before it takes root. We must find it and destroy it." "How do you know she will leave something?" I asked. "Because that is what they do. The chained ones cannot take the living by force. They must be invited. They must be welcomed. But once they have been seen, they can leave pieces of themselves behind, objects from their graves, items buried with their bodies. Things that should have rotted away centuries ago but have been preserved by the darkness that keeps them walking." She pulled back and looked at me with fierce determination. "When the sun comes up, we will search. We will find what she has left, and we will send it back to her." We waited through the remaining hours of the night, huddled together on my bed, listening to the sounds outside grow quieter and quieter, until only silence remained. My grandmother prayed continuously, her lips moving in an endless whisper, her fingers working the beads of her rosary. I tried to pray with her, but the words kept slipping away, replaced by the memory of colorless eyes and black nails, and a smile that promised eternal suffering. Somewhere around 3 in the morning I heard new sounds. Not the shuffling of feet or the scraping of metal, but something different. Something closer. A knock at the front door. My grandmother's prayers stopped mid-word. We both turned toward the sound, our bodies rigid with fear. The knock came again. 3 slow, deliberate raps. Then a voice. A woman's voice, dry and broken. "Child, I know you're in there. Let me in." I pressed closer to my grandmother. She put her hand over my mouth, warning me to stay silent. Another knock. Another call. "Open the door, child. It is cold out here, so cold. Let me warm myself by your fire." My grandmother shook her head violently, her eyes wide. "Do not answer," she mouthed. "Do not make a sound." But the voice continued. "I have gifts for you, child. Presents from so long ago. Things I saved for my own children before I lost them. Would you like to see? Would you like to play with me?" The sweetness in the voice was worse than the anger had been. It was the voice of a mother coaxing a reluctant child, full of false warmth and hidden hunger. Then another voice joined the first. Deeper, rougher, a man's voice, Remedios. My grandmother's face went white. "Remedios, open the door. It is Ignacio, your husband. I have come home." I felt my grandmother's entire body stiffen. Her grip on me tightened until it hurt. "Do not listen," she whispered. "It is not him, it is a trick." But the voice continued, and it sounded exactly like I imagined my grandfather would have sounded. Warm, familiar, loving. "Remedios, my love, I have missed you so much. 35 years is such a long time. Will you not open the door and let me see your face once more?" My grandmother was crying again, tears streaming down her cheeks, her lips pressed tightly together to keep from responding. "I know you have questions," the voice said. "I know you want to know why I did what I did. Open the door and I will explain everything. I will tell you about the woman. About the river. about what really happened that day. My grandmother's hand found mine and squeezed. "It is lying," she said, her voice barely audible. "Ignacio is dead. He cannot speak. He cannot explain. Whatever is out there wearing his voice is not him." But even as she said it, I could hear the doubt in her words, the longing. 35 years of unanswered questions, and here was a voice promising to answer them all. Then a third voice joined the chorus. "Abuela, it is me. Tomas, I am outside. I am so cold. Please let me in." My entire body went rigid with terror. The voice was mine, exactly mine. The same pitch, the same rhythm, the same accent. If I had not been sitting right there holding my grandmother's hand, I would have believed it was me standing outside that door. My grandmother clutched me tighter. "Do not listen," she said again. "You are here. You are safe. Whatever is outside is not you." But the voice kept calling, kept pleading, kept begging to be let in. And mixed with my voice were the other two, my grandfather's warm baritone and La Llorona's broken rasp, all three of them calling out together in a horrible chorus, "Let us in, let us in. We are family. We belong together. Open the door." My grandmother stood up suddenly, pulling me with her. "Stay behind me," she said. She walked to the door of my bedroom, then through the hallway to the main room of the house. The front door was visible from there, solid wood reinforced with iron bands, the same door that had stood in that frame for 200 years. The knocking was louder now, insistent. The voices continued their pleading. My grandmother reached into her pocket and pulled out a small bottle, holy water from the church blessed by the priest every Sunday. She unscrewed the cap and began to pour it along the base of the door, letting the water seep into the crack between the wood and the floor. The moment the water touched the threshold, a scream erupted from outside. Not a human scream. Something far worse. A sound of pain and rage that seemed to shake the walls of the house. The knocking became pounding fists, slamming against the wood with enough force to make the door shudder in its frame. My grandmother kept pouring, moving along the base of the door, creating a barrier of blessed water that sizzled and steamed where it met the wood. The pounding stopped, the screaming faded, and then slowly I heard footsteps, heavy, dragging footsteps moving away from the door down the path toward the road. The voices did not stop entirely. They grew quieter, more distant, but I could still hear them calling. "We will return," La Llorona said. "Every year we will return. He is ours now. You cannot keep him forever." And my grandfather's voice, or the thing wearing it, added, "You know what I did, Remedios. You know why I am chained, and soon you will be chained too." Then silence, true silence. The kind of silence that only comes after something terrible has ended. My grandmother stood at the door for a long time, the empty bottle of holy water clutched in her hand. Her shoulders were shaking, but when she turned to face me, her expression was calm. "They are gone," she said, "for now." She led me back to my room and made me lie down on the bed. She sat beside me, her hand on my forehead, her voice low and soothing. "The sun will rise soon," she said. "When it does, we will search the house. We will find what she left behind, and we will destroy it." I wanted to ask more questions, about La Llorona, about my grandfather, about what he had done and why he was chained. But exhaustion was pulling me down into darkness, and before I could form the words, I was asleep. I dreamed of the river. I was standing on the bank watching the water flow past. It was night and the moon was hidden behind clouds, but I could see clearly somehow, as if the darkness itself had become transparent. There was a woman standing in the shallows. She was holding something in her arms. Two somethings, small shapes that struggled weakly against her grip. She looked up at me. Her eyes were not white in this dream. They were brown, warm, human, and they were filled with tears. "I did not want to do it," she said, "but he told me it was the only way. He said he would love me if I came alone. He promised." She looked down at the shapes in her arms. The struggling had stopped. "They trusted me," she whispered. "They called me Mama, and I held them under until they stopped calling." She began to walk deeper into the water. It rose to her waist, her chest, her shoulders. I should have let them live, she said. I should have let them grow old and forget about me. But I was selfish. I wanted to be remembered. I wanted someone to light a candle for me, to say my name, to know that I existed. The water reached her chin. But no one remembers me now, no one except the children I try to take, and they remember me only as a monster. She smiled, and in that moment she looked almost peaceful. You will remember me, Tomas. You waved at me. You saw me. And now you will never forget me, no matter how hard you try. The water closed over her head. I woke to the sound of roosters. Sunlight was streaming through the curtains, warm and golden and impossibly normal. For a moment I thought the whole night had been a dream. Then I looked at my wrist and saw the marks, faded but still visible, 5 fingerprints burned into my skin. My grandmother was already awake, standing in the doorway of my room. "It is time," she said. "We need to search." We started with my room, checking every corner, every shadow, every crack in the walls. We looked under the bed, behind the furniture, inside the closet where I kept my few toys. We found nothing. We moved to the hallway, then the main room, then the kitchen. My grandmother was methodical, thorough, leaving no surface unexamined, but still we found nothing. It was not until we went outside that we discovered what La Llorona had left behind. The front door bore new scars, deep gouges in the wood where something had clawed at it during the night. The holy water had left dark stains on the threshold, as if it had burned the very stone. But beneath my window, lying in the dirt as if it had been carefully placed there, was a comb. It was made of bone, yellowed with age, the teeth worn down by centuries of use. Carved into the handle were words so faded they were barely legible. "Para mi hijo," for my child. My grandmother stared at the comb, her face pale. "That is hers," she said. "That was buried with her over 100 years ago. How it is here now, I cannot explain. But it is a piece of her, a piece she has left to maintain the connection." She did not touch it with her bare hands. She went inside and returned with a pair of iron tongs, the kind she used for handling hot coals. Carefully she picked up the comb and held it away from her body. "We will bury this," she said, "in consecrated ground under a cactus, surrounded by holy water and prayers. Perhaps that will be enough to weaken the bond. Perhaps it will give you more time, not safety, not freedom, just more time." I followed her around the house to the small garden where she grew herbs and vegetables. In the corner near the wall stood an old cactus, its petals thick and covered with spines. My grandmother dug a hole at its base deep enough that no animal would disturb it. She placed the comb inside, then poured holy water over it. The water hissed and bubbled when it touched the bone, and a smell rose up from the hole, the smell of burning. The smell of something that should not exist being forced back toward oblivion. She covered the hole with dirt, patted it down, and made the sign of the cross over the spot. "It is done," she said, "but I do not know if it will be enough." She turned to look at me, and for the first time I saw how old she truly was, how tired, how afraid. "There is something else you must know," she said, "about your grandfather, about why his voice was outside that door." I waited. She sat down on the low wall that bordered the garden, her hands folded in her lap. "Ignacio was not a good man," she began. "I loved him once when we were young, but he changed. Or perhaps he was always that way and I was too blind to see it." She paused, gathering herself. "He had another woman, a woman from the village on the other side of the mountain. He would go to her when he told me he was working in the fields. I knew. Everyone knew. But I said nothing because that was what wives did in those days. We endured. We prayed. We hoped our husbands would return to us." Her voice grew harder. "But he did not return. He kept going to her year after year, and then one day he told me he was leaving. He said he loved her more than he had ever loved me. He said he was going to start a new life with her, and I would never see him again." "What happened?" I asked. My grandmother looked at me with eyes that held secrets I was not sure I wanted to know. "He died," she said. "That same day. He went to meet her by the river under the mountain, and he never came back. How did he die? She did not answer immediately. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. They said he fell. They said he slipped on the rocks and hit his head, but there were marks on his back, marks that looked like hands. And the woman, his lover, she died a week later. They found her in the same river, in the same spot. She had drowned. She looked up at the sky, at the sun rising higher over the mountains. I do not know what happened by that river. I do not know if he fell or if he was pushed. I do not know if she killed herself out of grief or if something else took her. But I know this. They are both chained now. They walk together in the procession of the damned, bound to each other by the sin they shared. She turned back to me, and last night his voice was outside our door, asking to be let in, asking to explain. I thought about what I had seen in the procession, the chained ones shuffling through the darkness, and somewhere among them my grandfather and his lover bound together for eternity. But there was something else, something I had noticed but not understood until now. Abuela, I said slowly, I saw him. In the procession, a man with a straw hat like the one in the photograph. My grandmother's face went very still. He was in the third group, I continued, with the chained ones, and there was a woman walking beside him. Their bonds were connected. My grandmother closed her eyes. A single tear escaped and ran down her cheek. Then it is true, she said. He is damned. He will never find peace. She opened her eyes and looked at me with an expression I could not read. Did he see you? I thought back to the procession. The man in the straw hat had been walking with his head down, his shoulders slumped. He had not looked up. He had not seen me standing at my window. No, I said, he did not see me. My grandmother nodded slowly. That is good. That is very good. One monster hunting you is more than enough. She stood up and brushed the dirt from her skirt. You must leave this village, she said. You cannot stay here. She knows where you live now. She will return every year, and each time she will be stronger. Each time she will be harder to resist. Where will I go, your parents? You'll go back to Guadalajara. The city is large, full of people, full of noise. Perhaps she will have trouble finding you there. Perhaps the crowds will confuse her. She took my hand and led me back inside. I will call them today. I will tell them, you need to come home. I will not explain why. Some things cannot be explained over the telephone. She stopped at the altar in the living room, where my grandfather's photograph still stood among the candles and flowers. The plate of tamales had been emptied completely. The glass of tequila was dry. The cigarette had burned to ash. She reached out and touched the photograph, her fingers lingering on my grandfather's face. I forgave him, she said softly. Years ago I forgave him for what he did to me, but God has not forgiven him, and neither has the darkness that holds him now. She turned the photograph face down on the altar. I will not put this up again, she said. I will not light candles for a man who walks in chains. Let him fade. Let him be forgotten. Perhaps that is the only mercy I can give him. 1 week later, my parents came to take me back to Guadalajara. My grandmother did not explain to them what had happened. She simply told them that I had been having nightmares, that the village was too quiet for a growing boy, that I needed to be around other children. My parents accepted this without question. They had always felt guilty about leaving me here, and they were happy to have an excuse to bring me home. Before I left, my grandmother pulled me aside. Remember what I told you, she said. Every year on November 2nd, she will look for you. She will knock on your door. She will call your name. She will try to trick you into letting her in. Her grip on my shoulders tightened. Do not answer. Do not look out your window. Do not open your door for anyone, no matter whose voice you hear. She can imitate anyone, mimic any sound, copy any face. The only way to be safe is to hide until the sun rises. She pressed something into my hand. Her rosary, the wooden beads worn smooth by decades of prayer. This protected me, she said. It will protect you too. Keep it with you always. And when November comes, hold it tight and pray until morning. I hugged her then, burying my face in her shoulder. breathing in the scent of copal and cooking oil one last time. "Thank you," I said, "for saving me." She stroked my hair gently. "I did not save you, mijo, I only delayed her. The marks on your wrist, the comb in the ground, the connection she has forged between you. These things cannot be undone, they can only be endured." She pulled back and looked at me with eyes full of sorrow. "I wish I could do more. I wish I could take this burden from you, but some doors once opened can never be closed. Some invitations once given can never be revoked." She kissed my forehead. "Live well, Tomas. Live fully. Make every day count because you do not know how many days you have left." That was the last time I saw my grandmother healthy and strong. She died 14 years later on November 1st, 2005. In her sleep, they said, peacefully. I did not attend the funeral. I could not. November was too dangerous, the village too close to everything I was trying to escape. I sent flowers instead, white roses and orange marigolds, and I prayed for her soul from the safety of my apartment in Mexico City. But I have never stopped hearing her voice, and I have never stopped following her advice. Every year when November 2nd comes, I lock my doors, I close my windows, I pull the curtains tight and turn off all the lights. I hold her rosary in my hands and pray until the sun rises, and every year without fail she comes, La Llorona, the weeping woman, the monster I invited into my life with a single innocent wave. She knocks on my door, she calls my name, she begs to be let in. And now, after all these years, she does not come alone. For 33 years, I have followed my grandmother's rules. Every November 2nd, without exception, I have locked myself away from the world and waited for the sun to rise. I have lived in Mexico City, in Los Angeles, in Tokyo, in places so far from Suchitlan that I thought perhaps distance might weaken the connection. It never did. She always finds me. The first few years were the hardest. I was a child then, a teenager, trying to explain to my parents why I could not leave my room on a certain night, why I screamed when someone knocked on the door, why I woke up drenched in sweat with my grandmother's rosary clutched so tightly in my fist that the beads left permanent indentations in my palm. My parents thought I was traumatized. They sent me to doctors, to therapists, to priests who listened to my story with patient skepticism and prescribed pills that did nothing to stop the knocking. Eventually, I learned to stop talking about it. I learned to suffer in silence, to mark November 2nd on my calendar like a death sentence that arrived once a year, regular as clockwork. The marks on my wrist faded over time, but they never disappeared completely. On most days, they are barely visible, faint discolorations that could be mistaken for old scars. But on November 2nd, they burn. They pulse with heat that no ice can cool, and they darken to the same angry red they were that first night, as if her fingers are pressing into my skin from across whatever void separates the living from the dead. I am 40 years old now. I have outlived the curse that my grandmother warned me about. I have passed my 18th birthday, my 21st, my 30th. Every year I wonder if this will be the last. Every year I survive, and I do not know whether to feel grateful or simply exhausted. The morning after each November 2nd, I check my front door. There are always new marks. Scratches in the wood, gouges that go deeper than any human nail could reach. And there is always something left behind. A bone comb identical to the one my grandmother buried. A faded ribbon that smells of river water and decay. A child's shoe leather cracked and rotted, size for a foot that stopped growing 100 years ago. I collect these objects in a metal box lined with salt and holy water. I do not know what else to do with them. Burning them does not work. Burying them does not work. They always return, appearing on my doorstep like offerings from a suitor who will not take no for an answer. Last year, something changed. It was November 2nd, 2023. I was in my apartment in Mexico City, a small place on the 15th floor of a modern building with electronic locks and security cameras. I had done everything right. Doors locked, windows sealed, curtains drawn, rosary in hand. The knocking started at midnight, as it always does, child, the familiar voice called. Here. Open the door! I have waited so long. I pressed my hands over my ears. I had heard this voice every year for more than 3 decades. I knew its rhythms, its cadences, the way it shifted from pleading to angry to sweet. I knew all its tricks. But then I heard another voice, Mijo. My heart stopped. It was my grandmother's voice, not a memory, not a recording. Her actual voice as clear and present as if she were standing on the other side of my door. Mijo, open the door. It is Abuela. I have come to see you. I stopped breathing. She had died 19 years ago. I had not heard her voice in all that time except in dreams that left me weeping when I woke. But here she was calling to me through my locked door, asking to be let in. I want to tell you that I was strong. I want to say that I remembered her warnings, that I held firm, that I did not move from my corner. But I stood up. I walked toward the door. My hand reached for the lock. I caught myself at the last moment, my fingers millimeters from the deadbolt. I stood there shaking, tears streaming down my face, listening to my grandmother's voice beg me to let her in. Please, mijo. It is so cold out here. I have traveled so far to see you. Will you not open the door for your abuela? And then I heard something that shattered what remained of my composure. The sound of iron dragging on concrete, faint at first, almost lost beneath the voice, but unmistakable. The scraping, clanking sound of metal links being pulled along the hallway floor. My grandmother was chained. I do not know how long I stood there. It might have been minutes. It might have been hours. I listened to her voice grow more desperate, more pleading, more broken. I listened to the iron rattle every time she moved, and I understood with a certainty that went beyond logic or reason what had happened. She had spent her whole life trying to protect me. She had prayed for my safety, burned candles for my soul, given me her rosary as a shield against the darkness. And when she died, she had not found peace. She had been claimed by La Llorona, by my grandfather, by the connection that I had forged when I waved at the dead on that night 33 years ago. My grandmother had stood between me and the darkness for so long that when she finally crossed over, the darkness took her too. She was part of the procession now, part of the chained ones. And she was outside my door begging to be let in. I sank to the floor. I pressed my forehead against the cold wood of the door. I spoke to her through the barrier between us. I am sorry, I said. I am so sorry, abuela. This is my fault. All of it is my fault. The voice on the other side changed. It was still my grandmother, but there was something else in it now. Something older and darker speaking through her mouth. Yes, the voice said, it is your fault. You opened the door. You invited us in, and now we are all connected. Your grandfather, your grandmother, the woman who drowned her children, and soon you. I pressed my hands against my ears, but the voice slipped through. You cannot hide forever, Tomas. You cannot run forever. One day you will open the door. One day you will step outside at the wrong moment. One day your guard will slip, and we will be waiting. The metal scraped louder against the floor. We have eternity. You have only the years remaining in your fragile body. And when those years end, when your heart finally stops, you will join us. You will walk in the procession. You will feel the iron on your wrists and ankles, and you will understand what it means to be damned. The voice faded. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. I stayed on the floor until sunrise. When the light finally crept under my curtains, I forced myself to stand. I opened the door. On the threshold there were 2 objects. The bone comb, as always, para mi hijo, carved into its yellowed surface, and a small clay figure of a saint, the paint chipped and faded with age. I recognized it immediately. It had belonged to my grandmother. She had kept it on her bedroom altar for as long as I could remember. She had been here. Not just her voice, not just an imitation. My grandmother herself had stood outside my door, chained and damn begging me to let her in. I picked up the clay saint with trembling hands. It was cold, far colder than the November morning air could account for. And when I looked at it closely, I saw something that made my stomach turn. The face of the saint had been scratched away. In its place, someone had carved a crude smile. That night, I did something I had never done before. I went to a mirror. I do not keep mirrors in my apartment. I removed them all years ago after I started seeing shapes in my reflection that did not match my movements. But there is a small bathroom mirror that I cannot remove without damaging the wall, so I keep it covered with a dark cloth. I pulled the cloth aside. For a moment I saw only myself. A 40-year-old man with gray hair at his temples and dark circles under his eyes. A man who had spent half his life running from something that could not be outrun. Then I saw her. She was standing behind me, not in the bathroom but in the reflection, a woman with black hair and a face that might have been beautiful once. Her eyes were white, her lips were curved in a smile. And beside her, holding her hand, was my grandmother. Abuela Remedios looked just as I remembered her, old and tired and full of love. But her eyes were not her own. They were white like La Llorona's, and around her wrists, barely visible in the dark glass, were bands of iron. She raised her free hand. She waved at me, just like I had waved at her 33 years ago. I shattered the mirror with my fist. I did not even feel the pain until I saw the blood running down my arm, mixing with the glass fragments on the floor. That was last year. Tonight is November 2nd, 2024. I am sitting in my apartment with all the doors locked and all the windows sealed. The curtains are drawn. The lights are off. I have surrounded myself with holy water and salt and every protective charm I could find, and I am recording this story. Because tonight feels different. Tonight the marks on my wrist are burning brighter than they ever have. Tonight when I checked my door, the scratches were already there, even though the sun had not yet set. She is eager this year. They all are. The knocking has already started. It began at 11:30 earlier than usual. And there are more voices this time. Not just La Llorona, not just my grandmother, not just my grandfather. There's a child's voice now, a little boy calling my name. Tomas, brother Tomas, I am the one you waved at. Do you remember me? I was in the procession walking with my mother. You smiled at me. You made me feel seen. I do not remember waving at a child. I only remember the old man, the fading woman, La Llorona. But perhaps I did. Perhaps in those few minutes at the window I waved at many people without realizing it. Perhaps I invited more than one monster into my life. The knocking is getting louder now. The voices are overlapping, a chorus of the dead demanding entry. My grandmother, my grandfather, La Llorona, the child. And underneath them all a sound that I have never heard before, my own voice. Let them in, it says. You are tired. You have fought long enough. Let them in and it will all be over. I am holding my pen. I am writing these final words. The door is shaking. The locks are rattling. The holy water on my threshold is beginning to steam. I do not know if I will survive this night, but I know this. If you are listening to this story, if you have heard my warning, then please, for the love of everything sacred, remember what I have told you. On Dia de Muertos, do not look out your window after midnight. Do not open your door no matter who calls your name. Do not wave at strangers in the dark no matter how friendly they seem. Because some doors once opened can never be closed. Some invitations once given can never be revoked. And some monsters, once they see you, will never stop searching. The knocking has stopped. The silence is worse. I hear breathing on the other side of the door. Slow, steady, patient. And then a voice. Not La Llorona. Not my grandmother. Not my grandfather or the child. My own voice. Open the door, Thomas. It is time to join your family. I am looking at the door. My hand is reaching for the lock. I do not know if I can stop myself this time. If this is the end, then let this recording be my warning. Let my story be the candle that lights your way through the darkness. And if you hear knocking on your door tonight, if you hear voices calling your name, if you feel the urge to look outside and see who is waiting, do not answer. Do not look, do not wave, because they are always watching, they are always waiting, and once they see you, they will never let you go. The door is opening. I did not unlock it. She is here. She is. This recording was found on November 3, 2024, on a phone lying in the hallway outside apartment 1508 of a building in Mexico City. The apartment door was open. The locks had not been forced. There was no sign of a struggle. The only evidence that anyone had lived there was a pile of old clothes on the bedroom floor, a metal box filled with strange objects, and a bone comb lying on the threshold, carved with words that the investigating officer could barely read. Para mi hijo, for my child. No body was ever found. The building manager said the apartment had been rented to a man named Tomas for 15 years. He was quiet, she said, kept to himself. Never had visitors except on the first week of November, when he would lock himself inside and refuse to answer the door for anyone. The neighbors reported hearing knocking sounds throughout the night of November 2nd. Knocking and voices, a woman crying, a man calling out, a child laughing, and another sound beneath all the others, a sound like metal dragging on the floor. The case remains open. The police have no leads. The family has not been contacted because no family could be found. But I know what happened. I know because I listened to the recording. And last night, November 3rd, as I was transcribing these final words, I heard something. A knock at my door. 3 slow, deliberate raps, and a voice, dry and broken, calling from the other side. You listened to his story, you heard his warning, but you did not look away. You did not stop reading. That means you can see us now and we can see you. Happy Dia de Muertos.